The Stanley Cup Playoffs do not sleep, and neither do we. What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Hockey News Playoff Frenzy Live, brought to you by Sticks.com. I am your host, Emma Lingen. I am joined by Kelsey Surmatz and Mike Agello, and we are coming at you live to talk about Round 2, Game 4 between the Carolina Hurricanes and the Washington Capitals. Carolina wins that one pretty easily, 5-2. They now have a 3-1 lead in that series. So we're going to talk about what our panic level is for the Capitals at this point. Of course, we've also got Game 4 going on between the Vegas Golden Knights and the Edmonton Oilers right now. Edmonton's already taken a 1-0 lead there, so we'll be sure to keep you updated on that. Wherever you are watching us on YouTube, X, Instagram, LinkedIn, any or all of the places, we encourage you to send us your questions, send us your comments. You could get a chance to get featured on the show, and we'd love to answer your questions as well. And we love just being here, talking some hockey with you all at night. So we do have lots to get to today, but of course, before we do want to remind you that we are brought to you by Sticks.com. Why break the bank on sticks when you can get pro level composite sticks without the pro price tag at Sticks.com? That's STIX.com. Head there now and gear up. Okay, Mike, I'm going to start with you because we have covered this series. We've covered earlier games in this series, been a bit of a snooze fest. And it was looking like we were headed for something similar again. In this game, it started out, looked like pretty rough, pretty slow. I feel like we had talked about before, Washington had been playing Carolina's game, and it looked like Washington came out this time and they were like playing their game. They realized the urgency. They realized that this was a must win for them. But it seemed like it very quickly just kind of evened back out. And what did you think of the pace in the first period, especially? And what do you think was the reason that Washington couldn't kind of maintain that same level of urgency?
Yeah, I mean, they definitely stepped up their effort early on in the game. I think they realized that they sort of got caught in that Carolina chasm in Game 3, where they sort of put their version of the old Peterborough freeze, and just didn't allow the Capitals much offensive opportunities and much chances to really get quality chances on Frederik Andersen. And in this game, I thought the first 7 or 8 minutes, Washington was definitely the most urgent of the two teams, and then sort of sat back a little bit, and the Gostisbehere goal, I think, was sort of a ripple in the pond. It sort of just disturbed the flow. And for the first 2 periods, this was the same as Game 1 and Game 3. Washington was trapped in that Carolina chasm. They really couldn't break out of it. And then the third period was a little nuts, and I have some opinions on that, but I'll let Kelsey get a word in edgewise here.
Yeah, Kelsey.
It's I go back to something, and I cover the Pittsburgh Penguins. There's something that now former head coach Mike Sullivan, said several times throughout the season when the Penguins play the Hurricanes. This has been a bad matchup for them for years. And one thing that just sticks out is once Carolina establishes their game, it's really hard to chase a game against these guys.
Mm-hmm.
They get that first one. Obviously, Washington gets a good start to this game, but once Carolina gets that first one, it's really hard to chase a game. They're one of the best teams in the league at defending the rush, and that's kind of what Washington thrives off of. So you kind of saw spurts in this game where Washington was able to kind of find a few holes and get something going. But in the grand scheme of things, you just can't chase games against Carolina Hurricanes and expect to come out on top.
Yeah, definitely. Carolina coming at them with plenty of speed tonight. We definitely saw the advantage there. We've seen it kind of all series. But again, early in that first period, it was looking like Washington was going to take control. They were winning more of those puck battles early. They were increasing their shot volume. They're getting chances, but they just weren't converting. And then, Mike, you mentioned the Gostisbehere goal, and that was just kind of what set Carolina off and just sort of put Washington back on their heels. It just kind of seemed like I'm curious, Mike, if you observe this as well. It seemed like Washington just wasn't able to really generate sustained pressure in the offensive zone. Whenever they did get there, it was too many one and dones. And Carolina was just so good at taking away time and space and not allowing them to get set up in the offensive zone. What did you think of just kind of the stifling brand of defensive hockey that Carolina was playing tonight?
Yeah, I mean, we talked on previous shows how we thought Carolina, this version of the Hurricanes, was not as good as they were last year. They added Gensel, and I thought and they had Pesce and they had Brady Shea, and they looked to be a more formidable opponent last year, and they didn't make it past to the conference final. This year, because they're not as talented, they're buying into Rod Brindamore's system and what they need to do. And I think that's sort of benefiting them because they don't have a Rantanen. They don't have a Gensel as a trigger man on the power play. They have to play a disciplined system. Their defense isn't as good. You have Sean Walker and Jaden Chatfield instead of Shea and Pesce. So really, they're limited, but that may be to their benefit because they're sticking to what works for them. They got the lead. They held the lead into the third period, and then I think the officiating, again, giving Washington a two-man advantage in a 3-1 game, and the Capitals coming in within inches of tying the game before they get the Sean Walker insurance goal. I didn't think Washington played a particularly great game after that first 7 or 8 minutes, but they were still in it late.
Yeah, Kelsey, you mentioned how it's difficult to chase a game against Carolina, against a team like that with so much speed, even though they don't maybe have the same level of offensive weapons that Washington does. But what do you think of Washington in this series? It just kind of feels like they've fallen flat a little bit. It was in the first round, they were getting Montreal to play their game, and now it's like they can't even play their own game. I mean, what do you make of just sort of the fall off for Washington from the first round to the second round here?
I just think Carolina's found a way to shut down their best players. And simply put, those top couple lines for Carolina are really just outplaying Washington's top 6 in every sense. Ovi just got his first goal of the series. It took a 5-on-3 for him to do it. But to be quite honest, I don't like to say the word engaged. It's not that I don't think the Capitals are engaged enough, but it just really seems like the frustration's mounting. As I said, it's hard to chase games against the Carolina Hurricanes, but they've just got to find a way to capitalize on those early opportunities because, I think you see the frustration seeping in for Ovechkin. I think you kind of saw in Wilson. I'd say that Wilson's probably been their best player in the series still. But you're also seeing kind of that bottom 6 production dry up as well. Anthony Beauvillier was point per game in the first round, playing on that top line with Strome and Ovi. He's on the fourth line. He doesn't have a point in this series. So, I think Carolina's just simply been the better team, line for line. And they're really just finding a way to neutralize the Capitals' threats. And like we've gone over already in the stream, Washington doesn't have any sustained zone pressure. Carolina has a really good way of, getting in lanes, kind of keeping things to perimeter. They're not giving up very many high danger opportunities. And that's the recipe for success. So I just think it comes down to Carolina being able to shut down their top end players because simply put, they're not doing enough on the Capitals end.
They're not. One area in particular where the Capitals have struggled, not just in this series, but in the playoffs, is on the power play. Their power play has just really kind of dried up. I mean, you mentioned, Kelsey, the frustration that was evident. I thought that was especially true on the power play. I mean, Carolina got those 2 penalties early in the first period. First, there was the roughing from Seth Jarvis, the double minor on Martinook as well. So that was 2 gifts to the Capitals early in this game. They were not able to capitalize. Now, part of that is Carolina having a really strong penalty kill. I mean, they've given up just 2 power play goals in the entire playoffs coming into this game. Washington, though, they had scored the least amount of, or the smallest amount of power play goals in the playoffs coming into this game. Of the teams that are left in the playoffs, the only team that has been worse than Washington on the man advantage is the Winnipeg Jets, believe it or not. So regular season success, folks, does not guarantee anything in the postseason. So just interesting to see like the differences in special teams here. But Mike, how much do you think special teams is going to be what defines this series or determines this series? Or I guess beyond that, if Carolina does advance, do you think they're going to be able to kind of ride this penalty killing spree like for the rest of the playoffs? Because, you got to take the advantages where you can, but it just seems like, I don't know. It's maybe they're not doing the flashiest things. We talked about it before. This series been kind of a snooze fest. They're not going to score a ton of goals except tonight, apparently. But, when it comes to those margins, like, killing penalties and taking the advantages where you can, what do you think their biggest advantage is going to be in these playoffs?
Well, let's just say if it ends up being a Florida-Carolina Eastern Conference final, when there's a power play, I'm going upstairs to get myself a sandwich because they both have excellent penalty killers, and the Panthers have stifled the Maple Leafs power play, and we see what Carolina has done. They are making Washington look sort of disinterested because they're the faster of the 2 teams. They're winning the races for the pucks. They're going into the corners. And, the one advantage that Washington had throughout the season, they got a giant like Protas. They have Ovechkin, who is like a bull in a china shop. They have a player like Chikrin or Roy, who are big defensemen on the blue line. When you have a bunch of water bugs like the Hurricanes with Stankoven and just really quick players, it makes bigger players look slow and disinterested. So that I think is what's going on in the series right now.
Yeah, Kelsey, I think that to your earlier point about players on Washington maybe not looking engaged, even Ovechkin, you mentioned that he wasn't he wasn't really contributing much offensively, and you could see the visible frustration there, obviously, before he did end up scoring in the third period. But it seemed like even when he was trying to make an impact in other ways, he's trying to throw the body around, he's trying to lay these hits on guys, even that, he just, I don't know if it's just me, he seemed a little slow, a little lackadaisical in the way he was doing it. It's just the sense of urgency just wasn't really there as much. So Kelsey, I do want to ask you about that a little bit more, because the Capitals during the regular season led the entire league with 25 comeback wins on the season. So where has that gone? where has that level of urgency gone in the playoffs? And what do you think the biggest difference is? Do you think it's just honestly they're tired and playoff hockey is a different animal? I mean, what's kind of the disconnect here for them?
I mean, I keep going back to just the matchup with Carolina, but I think that's mostly what it comes down to. I mean, I think the frustration is coming out in the form of them just not being able to figure them out. And, they, like I said, there were times in this game and we saw that they were able to break through, but beyond that, they're not generating anything sustained. And another big thing that I'm noticing is I feel like Carolina's blue line is vastly outplaying Washington's blue line in this series. I just think, Burns has been really good on both sides. I think, Gosh Despair has been good in this series. We saw Walker finally get his first playoff goal. I think Carolina's blue liners are just making better decisions. They're activating at the right times. I'm just not seeing, those same contributions that we saw from Wah and Chicken got the goal tonight. But I feel like Washington's blue line needs to engage more and get more active. So I'm noticing a few differences on the back end, but in terms of urgency, it's a complicated issue because, I wouldn't say that there's no urgency, but just the fact that Carolina, they don't have an answer for them and they just can't solve this. That's how their frustrations kind of manifesting itself in these games. They just kind of, I don't want to say they quit on it, but it's kind of, they don't have an answer. So I still think they're trying to seek an answer. They haven't found it yet. And that's where that frustration's coming out. And, I think you said it, Michael, too, when you play against a fast team like the Hurricanes, these bigger guys on Washington, they look a lot slower. And I don't think they've figured out that speed aspect yet either. I just don't think this is a good matchup for them.
And Emma, what would help the Washington blue line is not getting your stick caught in the boards. I think this Stanley Cup playoffs, it should be it's like an episode of Stranger Things, where you have a team scoring a goal with 0.4 of a second, and now a player getting his stick wedged in the boards and trying to pull it out, and then realizing he's been caught up. Almost like he pinched in, and then there's a 2-on-1 going the other way, and it ends up costing the team. Rasmus Sandin is a former Toronto Maple Leaf draft pick, so that should give you a clue about the bad luck situation.
Well, if you are just joining us now, this is the Hockey News Playoff Frenzy Live, brought to you by Sticks.com. Emma Lingen, Kelsey Surmatz, Mike Agello. We are here talking about Game 4 between the Carolina Hurricanes and the Washington Capitals. The Canes have now pushed Washington to the brink. They have a 3-1 series lead, and this series is heading back to Washington. But this does now mean that Washington is going to have to win a game against Carolina in Carolina for Game 5 if they do want to advance, or for Game 6 rather, if they do want to advance. So it's definitely challenging. This is a Carolina team that is really, really strong at home. Do you want to check in quickly before we get back to our conversation about this game? We got the Golden Knights and the Oilers going on right now. They've got about 5 minutes left in the first period, and the Oilers have taken a 2-0 lead over Vegas. So that is one that we will definitely make sure to keep an eye on. Adam Henrique having a night already on hat trick watch. He has scored both of Edmonton's goals. So we will keep an eye on that one and keep you updated there. But for now, heading back to Washington and Carolina. And Mike, I want to ask you, because we talked about this on the wraparound earlier today, actually. Now, Andrei Svechnikov, he gets the empty netter. It's an empty netter. That's fine. But still, the point or the goal ties him now with Nathan MacKinnon for the second most goals in the playoffs right now of active playoff players, as in guys who are still in the playoffs. He is behind only a guy who has had 2 hat tricks named Mikko Rantanen with the Dallas Stars. So Svechnikov, 7 goals in the playoff. And you talked about this earlier, which is why I wanted to ask you, how much of this is mental for the Hurricanes, with obviously they don't have that superstar. They lost Rantanen, they lost Jake Gensel, they lost Martin Necas. Not that I think anyone was calling Necas a superstar before he left, but he was kind of on that trajectory. So I think looking at the pieces that they don't have, do you think that that's kind of a conscious mental just buy-in from the Hurricanes? It's like, hey, we don't need these superstars, and we're gonna win this our way.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of motivation there. The plucky Carolina Hurricanes, we'll show everybody we don't need you, Miko. We don't need you, Jake. We're gonna forge forward with Jackson Blake and Jaden Chatfield. I mean, I think there's a little we want to stick it to everybody and motivation. Freddie Anderson, I talked before, playoff Freddie was like a swear word in Toronto because the guy in 5 years didn't win once. But he made the conference finals when he was with Anaheim, and he's had some injury issues in Carolina, but he's playing out of sight right now. So I mean, I'm sure there's some motivation there. I'm sure they really want to show everybody. And there are players that signed there, like Taylor Hall. He had a great game tonight. He scored what I thought was the dagger goal to make it 3-1. This is a former Hart Trophy winner, and he's played very well in the playoffs. So, I think Carolina wants to prove everybody wrong right now.
I think they do. And you mentioned Freddie Anderson. Logan Thompson as well on the other side. He made 32 saves for Washington tonight. So not a bad night for goaltending, to be sure. But I think that, Anderson being the goalie to beat in this year's playoffs is not something that I think anyone would have had on their bingo card for the postseason, for all the reasons you just mentioned, Mike. Kelsey, I do want to ask you about something you talked about earlier with Ovechkin and how he finally scored his first goal of this series. It took a 2-man advantage for him to do it. He seems to be one of the guys who has been visibly frustrated. Another guy who's been visibly frustrated, although he's kind of always visibly frustrated, is Tom Wilson. And I think, how much we got a comment earlier. I think how much of it is, do you think, there it is, that the Canes are not really taking the bait from Tom Wilson or from Ovechkin when he tries to throw the body around, when they're not getting the bounces to go their way. So they try to make an impact in other ways with the physicality. I mean, how much do you think that Carolina sticking to their system, not taking the bait is really kind of increasing that frustration level for Washington?
Oh, it's huge for the Canes. And I'm actually glad you pointed out that comment because I wanted to talk about it. So right on cue. But yeah, so, this is something we've seen the Capitals do for years and years and years. When things aren't going their way, this is what they resort to. This is the stuff that, they try to bait teams into taking penalties. We saw that minor penalty called. They were trying to bait Carolina into taking, an even up penalty. They didn't take the bait. And not only are the Canes disciplined, but if that strategy isn't working for the Capitals, you have to wonder what else they have to fall back on. Because, these are their usual tricks, so to speak. You see, didn't work for Wilson in this game. Didn't work for Ovi in that game. We saw that shift in the second period, midway through the second period, where Ovi just went out and started hitting everything in sight. And, if the opposing team isn't taking that bait and they're just brushing it off and getting right back to what they were doing before that, and you're taking penalties too to put them on the power play, you're not doing much to help yourself momentum-wise. So I think, the Capitals need to find a creative way to really break through here, because I don't think the Canes are going to change in that way. I don't think they're all of a sudden going to start taking the bait here because what they're doing is working. And, it's going to take a little bit more than that to really throw the Canes off. So, I think in terms of Wilson, in terms of Ovechkin, I think they need to, get back at them by getting on the score sheet. I really think that's the only solution for those guys.
Emma, if you take the two Eastern Conference series side by side, as Kelsey mentioned, Carolina has not taken the bait. They have not bitten in on Tom Wilson. They have not, engaged Ovechkin because they really don't have anybody that has the physical stature to do that. What's happening in Florida, Toronto? Toronto has been baited by that group of reprobates like Sam Bennett and Matthew Tkachuk, they're engaging to the point that Max Domi came close to getting suspended because he did the little revenge tour on Barkov. Toronto is now playing Florida's game, which Florida has the advantage. And right now, in 3 of the 4 games, Washington has been relegated to playing Carolina's game, and Carolina has won all 3 of those games.
Yeah, that's a really good call out. I think really good comparison in what we've seen. And we talked about with Toronto too in the first round when they faced Ottawa, how Ottawa came on really strong and maybe a little, hot off the jump because they looked like a team that had not been in the playoffs in a long time. So it's like, oh, we got to mix it up and we got to throw the body, we got to get physical. And that resulted in a lot of bad penalties. And then it sort of, they settled down as the series went on. And then, they kind of settled into playing Toronto's game, which is let's keep it pretty and let's not get too physical. Now you see Toronto trying to play Florida's game, like you said, and it doesn't go well for them. Let's see. We got a comment. Washington should go full chaos mode in game 5. Line blender, goalie switch, all in. Well, I don't know if we'll see that, but how much do you think, Kelsey, how much do you think being back at home is going to be an advantage for Washington, if at all? Do you think that frustration that they have, can they channel it? They've shown, like I said, 25 comeback wins this year. They've shown that they're capable of channeling that frustration into wins on the ice, but with their backs against the wall in this series, I mean, how do you see them responding in game 5?
The Capitals thrive off of momentum swings. And we've seen this all throughout the year from them. And especially at home, the Capitals, obviously with Ovi's goal chase, have had a really good crowd at home all season. That's continued into the playoffs. I do think they kind of thrive off that energy a little bit, but I think it comes down to, they've had these early starts. They've had really good starts to games. They simply just need to capitalize early and, establish their game early and make Carolina chase them. Because I think once Carolina's chasing a game, that's when they start to expose some of those, the softer areas of the ice, and they leave some openings. And that's where the Capitals can really attack. Because like I said earlier, they thrive off the rush. And they thrive off of momentum swings. So I think the key for Washington is going to be getting out to an early lead at home, thriving off that home crowd momentum. And I think that'll really help them. And I also just wanted to make a note about the line blender comment. Going back to, someone I mentioned earlier, I cover the Pittsburgh Penguins. I got the chance to watch Anthony Beauvillier for most of the season. And, Beauvillier thrives in a top 6 role. When you look up and down lineups, he's not somebody, you really think about putting in that role. But I think, in that first series against Ottawa, that's where his production comes from. And obviously, that wasn't working for them early on in this series, but I would like to see him kind of bumped back up into that top 6 role, because we've seen in the past from Beauvillier, a la New York Islanders, that he can be, one of those guys that helps shift momentum, and he kind of thrives in those atmospheres and those situations. So I'm curious to see if they do make any changes to their lineup, but ultimately, I think for the Capitals, it's going to be getting out to an early lead and really, capitalizing on whatever energy that home crowd gives them. And I think that'll help guys like Ovechkin too.
Yeah, I think you're right. And to your point on Beauvillier, I primarily cover the Nashville Predators. He was with them for the final stretch in the playoffs last season and can confirm he was a difference maker in the postseason, especially for Nashville. So, could be worth a shot. You always see this is the time of year for unlikely heroes too. So I think that at this point, Washington really is going to have to kind of pull out all the tools in their belt and see what they can do here. I mentioned we've got Oilers and Golden Knights right now. After 20 minutes, the Oilers are up 2-0, courtesy of Adam Henrique. So we will keep an eye on that one. But as we do prepare to wrap up here, do want to touch on that series a little bit. Mike, I want to ask you, because we talked about this earlier today. Stuart Skinner in goal for Edmonton. At the moment, doesn't seem to be at the moment after 20 minutes he is shutting out Vegas, so it seems to be working out fine for them. But overall, what's your concern level for the Oilers if Cal Pickard is still unable to go? Obviously Skinner's in net for this game. Coming into this game, mind you, I want to read the stats again because they're a little rough. 0-3, 5.36 goals against, and that's an .817 save percentage in 3 playoff games for the Oilers. So not great. What do you think is, sometimes you see this with teams where they will kind of rally around a struggling goaltender and maybe kind of turn up the juice offensively. But Mike, what's your concern level for the Oilers if they do have to rely on Stuart Skinner going forward here?
Those stats are like Connor Hellebuck on the road. He's the great equalizer for Vegas, meaning as long as he's in the net, they have a chance to win. They're up 2-0 right now. They were up 2-0 with 2 Corey Perry goals in game 3, and they came back because Stuart Skinner, I just think, is suffering from a crisis of confidence. He was a good goaltender in the playoffs last year at times. He has not been that so far. Now, he could very well win this game. I mean, they could score a ton of goals and outscore their goaltender, but I don't know. I mean, I think, I'd rather be up 2-0 than down 2-0, but Vegas still has to think they have a chance in this game because Stuart Skinner just is not good right now.
Yeah, Kelsey, I'm curious your thoughts on this series. I mean, I feel like I was kind of surprised, which I shouldn't be considering the Oilers have Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid, but I still was rather surprised that Edmonton came out to a 2-0 lead in this series. Of course, Vegas barely wins in the final second of game 3 to make it 2-1. But you watched Riley Smith in Pittsburgh and the contributions he can bring there, and obviously with Vegas, it just kind of seems like they should be beating. I feel like they should be beating Edmonton more easily, or this shouldn't be this close of a series, or maybe it should be closer. I don't know. What are your thoughts on this series overall?
I mean, I think Edmonton's controlled most of the play. I mean, they're playing their game, and I just don't think you can underestimate Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid. The fact of the matter is, when you have those 2 guys on your team, you can outscore goaltending. You can outscore opposition because they're just that lethal. And just going back to the goaltending for a second, I would say Aiden Hill's, I don't want to say human, but he's been a little human this series. I don't think there's been a couple quote unquote soft goals. I think Hill can be a little bit better. Obviously the whole Skinner effect is, we'll see how that pans out. But just like, it's obviously a completely different kind of game they play, but it's hard to chase a game against the Oilers too, because they have defensive weaknesses. They may or may not have a goaltending deficiency now. It'll be interesting to see how Vegas responds in the second period too, because to be honest, I thought that game was put away in game 3, and then Vegas really pushed strong in the third period, and I think that's where you really started to see them kind of gaining momentum, getting to their game. Vegas is, when they're at their best, they're forechecking hard. They have sustained pressure in the offensive zone. They're cycling. And we didn't really get to see that till, the latter stage of that game. So I don't really have an answer as to, why they haven't been able to establish that, other than just Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid are really just that dominant. And when they get good enough goaltending, I think that's good enough for Edmonton. So we'll see, what happens with the rest of this one. But something I will say, a goal like Smith's could be one of those series turning moments. That completely sucked the life out of that building. So I'm a little bit surprised that Edmonton's up 2-0 early in this one too, because I really thought Vegas was going to come out really, really strong in this one.
Give it time.
We shall see. We shall see what happens in this series, of course, in first intermission now, but we are going to let everyone go catch the second period of this one, because I think it's going to be an exciting one in one way or the other. Like you said, Kelsey, a little surprising that they're up 2-0 already, but we will see what happens there. For those of you night owls who are going to stay up and watch the rest of this one between Vegas and Edmonton. Once again, this has been the Hockey News Playoff Frenzy Live, brought to you by Sticks.com. Emma Lingen, Kelsey Surmatz, Mike Agello here tonight, covering the game of the night, which was the Carolina Hurricanes 5-2 win over the Washington Capitals. Carolina now has a 3-1 series lead there. But for now, we are going to say goodnight. But just a reminder that we are here every night during the playoffs, live, talking about the games, talking about the big storylines. We love hearing from all of you tuning in all across all the many platforms that we are live on right now. So thank you to everyone who is tuned in to watch, to listen, and to send us your questions and comments. We really appreciate it. For now, for Kelsey Surmatz, Mike Agello, I'm Emma Lingen. We will see you tomorrow.